and I'm with the Gwinnett County Public Library, and this is our Meet the Author series. This evening, we will be talking about Happily Ever Older, Revolutionary Approaches to Long-Term Care by Moira Welsh. And these books are in stock and available at this event's bookstore partner, Eagle Eye Bookshop. So we encourage you to support them. And I will put their website address for you in the chat box. So thank you again for coming. And we want to welcome, and we are most grateful to have with us, Regina Miller. She is the Division Director for Gwinnett County Health and Human Services. She is responsible for the management and operations of Gwinnett Senior Services. Senior Services consists of 4 senior centers, and they provide essential services such as home delivered meals, transportation, homemaking, and respite services. Their mission is to help Gwinnett seniors age in place successfully. She is also responsible for the management and operations of 3 one-stop centers. These centers collaborate with community agencies to provide and connect services that help improve the health and well-being of a growing and diverse Gwinnett County. Over the last year of this pandemic, for example, she and her team have, believe it or not, provided seniors with over 200,000 meals. That's very impressive. Many thanks to Living Healthy Gwinnett and Regina for being with us and partnering with us tonight. Regina, take it away.
Thank you, Denise. Thank you for that great introduction. I appreciate everything that you've been able to share. I was very honored to be asked tonight to speak with Moira Welsh because she, I think when we'll get started here very soon, but I will give the great introduction before I read the official, that she has written a book here that really appeals to so many different populations, whether you're a caregiver, whether you are a senior, whether you are just exploring this, for the first time, whether you are working in the industry, this book will appeal and provide some great concepts. So we're going to get into that, but I will first read about this amazing author that we're speaking with tonight. So Moira Welsh is an investigative journalist with the Toronto Star. Moira has co-authored investigations that have won 3 national newspaper awards and a Michener Award for public service journalism. She was a finalist for the Justicia Award for legal reporting and the Canadian Hillman Prize. She started as a breaking news reporter and soon joined the investigative team where she has written on social justice, the environment, and the lives of people living in seniors' homes. Moira lives in Toronto, Ontario with her family. Welcome, Moira. We're so glad you're here.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really pleased to be here tonight. I really enjoyed my trip to Atlanta years ago now, but so happy to be reconnecting. So thank you.
You're very welcome. So if you would like, obviously we have so much to delve into this book, and I know we obviously have some people on the call that have either had a chance to review and read, or they're looking at maybe picking this book up and reading. So would you like to kind of talk with us a little bit about some of the concept of the books, some of the models that are explored regarding seniors, caregiving, and long-term care, and then if it's good with you, we'll go ahead and I'll just pepper you with a couple of questions in between, and we'll go from there. And I know our audience will certainly be able to also join in with us.
Sounds great. Thank you. So in the middle of a pandemic, I am publishing a book about hope. Happily Ever Older shows that it is possible to flourish in our later years with friendship, purpose, and freedom. As an author and a journalist, I've spent a lot of time inside traditional long-term care homes, talking to families and residents. I've seen the narrow hallways that look like storage space for equipment, and residents sitting still for hours with heads down, as if they no longer really exist. The stories that I tell in my book, specific examples of innovative homes, of spouses, children, and bold leaders, show the opposite. That people can spend their final years with life, even zest, instead of waiting to die. I wrote Happily Ever Older as a call to action, to inspire people to demand better for their loved ones and themselves. But first, let's talk about ageism. Most of us didn't really think about it until the pandemic exposed us to the fact that ageism is entrenched in our society, in the policies of governments and institutions. In the worst of circumstances, as we have seen, it is deadly. The way we as a society view seniors is reflected in the way long-term care operates. As I wrote in the prologue of Happily Ever Older, there is a deep desire now for new ideas. And the future of long-term care relies on people to raise their voices and demand change. We will all benefit from the recognition that people who are lucky enough to live for a very long time don't lose their humanity as they age. Back in the summer of 2018, I published a new newspaper story about a dementia unit near Toronto in Canada that transformed its care through a pilot project with the butterfly model, the same model used in the Atlanta home that I featured in Happily Ever Older. It was the reaction of families to that initial story that inspired my book. Sons and daughters and grandchildren called and emailed, their voices high with excitement, asking about other homes and models of care. They asked a lot of questions. Most were deeply moved by the possibility that long-term care could be different. And it surprised me how many were seeking new ideas that showed parents, grandparents, or people preparing for their own future could actually spend their days doing what they enjoyed, giving a sense of value and purpose. That response inspired me to seek out other homes that are changing the way we live in our later years. The pandemic has forced many of us to contemplate the impact of social isolation, mostly because we are all affected. As a journalist, I spoke to families who watched through nursing home windows as their mother or father withered, not from COVID, but from loneliness. Research shows that loneliness is detrimental to our physical health, with links to heart disease, strokes, or dementia. In fact, it's so harmful to people of all ages that in the United Kingdom, the government created a ministry to combat loneliness. The homes and programs that I visited for my book focus on eradicating loneliness by emphasizing the value of friendship, conversation, and a bit of fun, much like the way we lived before, hopefully. Or as they said it to Hogevik in the Netherlands, a normal life. So moving forward, we need better options for social connections and innovative ways to live in the community, like co-owned housing or NORCs, naturally occurring retirement communities. I've heard of a group of friends who all bought new build condos on the same floor with plans to share the cost of a personal support worker or a healthcare aide if that day ever comes. Nobody wants to live in a nursing home, but some of us, even the most powerful, will one day need the kind of care it provides. So why not make it a great experience? It is possible to operate a home that meets the medical needs of vulnerable adults while also enabling them to flourish and reach their potential no matter what stage in life. In my book, I spend a lot of time talking about the experiences of families. And until we have that experience, it's almost impossible to appreciate the emotions that people feel trying to care for a vulnerable parent or spouse. Marjorie Bittinger was 87 years old when I met her. She lives just outside of Atlanta. And when it was time to move her husband into a nursing home, she had an unusual request. She asked the administrator of Pebblebrook, part of the Park Springs retirement community in Stone Mountain, if she could live with her husband after he moved into the home. And I'd like to share a passage from my book that describes Marjorie's experience. So here it goes. Freedom to innovate. It's a key part of the Butterfly program, offering people comfort in their final years. Freedom allowed 87-year-old Marjorie Bittinger to feel at peace while placing her husband of 64 years in the home. Leaving a husband, wife, or parent in a care home can lead to a world of emotional pain. In my years researching stories on long-term care, I've spoken with hundreds of families. And even if those families gave selfless care, or if jobs took them too far away to help, most feel a terrible guilt dropping off a parent or a spouse and walking away. Guilt is an emotion that can torment people, especially when care goes wrong. even when it goes right. Some children feel shame over the ability of a caregiver, a stranger, to look after their dad when they couldn't. Or a wife feels resentment because a worker can bring out the humor in her husband when he hadn't laughed with her for years. The act of letting go, it's never easy. Marjorie took an innovative approach. When I meet her, she's sitting with her husband in the dining room on the advanced side of the memory care home. John Bittinger is 86 years old, with the face and shoulders of a man who spent his life taller and stronger than most. Now, he has Parkinson's disease and Lewy body dementia. While John waits for lunch, Marjorie takes me to his room for a chat. A few pictures hang on the walls, but most are packed away because John just moved here after living in a larger room with Marjorie until a month ago. She came for a tour of the memory care home in spring of 2018 and asked the manager if she could move in with her husband, just to make sure. The manager said, interesting, yes. 8 months, she says, of her stay in memory care. I was not ready to turn him loose and say goodbye. Well, walk it back. We, Bit and I, went to Peabody Demonstration School in Nashville. He started there in 6th grade. I went there in 9th grade. I have known Bit since 9th grade. We dated. He was in a fraternity. I was in a sorority. We exchanged pins, so we were pinned in high school. I guess it was selfishness on my part. We had been married for 64 years. I wasn't ready to just drop him, so to speak. I wanted to know more about the daily schedule and just really wasn't ready to say goodbye in that sense. That's the end of my quote from my book.
Right.
I'm not suggesting that all nursing homes will take this approach. Pebblebrook is unique. It follows the butterfly model, which focuses on the importance of feelings and freedom to innovate among staff and clearly families too. And there were some pretty interesting examples of innovation in my book. But the opportunity to live in the home, however rare, enabled Marjorie to adapt to a new phase of life for her husband and herself. It's the traditions that are often the most difficult. In San Diego, leaders at the Glenner Alzheimer Family Centers call Alzheimer's a family disease because they know how deeply every family member is impacted. The story that I told from San Diego shows that good day programs with enriched, engaging opportunities for art, music, and camaraderie can delay the entry to long-term care. I interviewed a deputy sheriff who took his mother to the program on its opening day. Her name was Susie. She was not pleased with him at all, but after he left, the leaders from the day program found a way to engage her, inspired by her previous career in accounting. For the next year, she didn't miss a day. It gave her son the ability to work without worry or just go for a bike ride to clear his mind. The CEO of the Glenner Day Program, a man named Scott Tardy, spent most of his career running nursing homes before he arrived at Glenner to run the day programs. We spoke at length about families, guilt, and resentment. So here are a few paragraphs from my book about Tardy's perspective on the struggles of families. In his years overseeing nursing homes, Scott Tardy saw that guilt every day. It took on a life of its own, darkening interactions between families and the nursing homes, correctly or not. There's nothing wrong with guilt, he says. It is very natural. These are their parents, and most people love their parents. And even if they had a bad relationship with one or both parents, they still want to try to find a way to make their remaining years as comfortable as possible. But they are dealing with the guilt of placing a loved one in a nursing facility or an assisted living facility, probably having promised them they would never do that. What typically happens in a nursing home or assisted living is, I say, here's my loved one. And guess what? I'm going to come back in a couple of weeks and most likely something is going to go wrong. And even if something doesn't happen, I haven't been there in 2 weeks and my loved one is going to look different to me, which is going to alarm me and make me feel like you are not taking care of them because no one can take care of them like I can take care of them. Right. There is a built-up animosity that starts to brew. Even if you know inherently that you can't take care of your loved one and this facility is helping them, and I'm talking about the good facilities, there is this unconscious anger over the fact that you couldn't provide that care, which is almost an unrealistic expectation. And then you have the family members, multiple siblings, one that says the parents shouldn't go into the nursing home, another that says they should go into a home. And then there's the one who says, it's ridiculous you had to put them into a home. Why couldn't you care for them? And they live 3,000 miles away. And then, oh, by the way, there's the dynamic that says, well, we're now having to spend all this money that was supposed to be our inheritance. So this fundamental guilt issue, I've got this all mapped out, he said, because I've seen it hundreds of times in my career. But I don't see it here, he says, of the day program. It doesn't mean it can't happen, but generally families drop their loved ones off at 8:45 and they come back at 5:15. They've had a good day. They've had a chance to do some of the things they need to do. That's the end of the quote. When I began exploring ideas about relationship-based care for my story in 2018, my newspaper story, the home I visited was actually pretty good by government standards. But again, government inspections focus on tasks, cleanliness, and documentation. People were safe, clean, and fed. They were also lonely, sometimes agitated, and very, very bored, a typical long-term care home. For residents, every day was spent sitting in the TV room, usually staring at the floor. Others walked nonstop through the hallways as if they were seeking something, although they never found it. As the butterfly training unfolded, music became a big part of the day with a man I called the professor, playing the piano. He had fairly serious dementia, but knew all the old war tunes or church hymns. He must have been a great conversationalist in his early years because his way with words remained a significant part of his skill set. And I share this because despite our fear as a society about dementia, and I'm not pretending that it is easy on anyone, people with cognitive decline still have much to offer. And I realized from interviews with geriatricians, advocates, operators, and families that some had heard of these programs, but didn't seem to know what they looked like in action. So that made it difficult to call for change. I wanted to give firsthand accounts based on detailed journalistic reporting of what life is like in these different homes. For my book, I looked at individual homes with programs that had an existing track record of success, but are also constantly evolving with new ideas, especially in the field of dementia care, where much of the current innovation is underway. With the exception of the butterfly model, which has qualitative studies and some data collected by individual homes, most of the homes I looked at had research done. The Eden alternative had studies that showed, for example, a statistically significant number of residents had a more positive view of their future. And others, such as the greenhouse model, a smaller model, showed health outcomes that lessened the need for higher medical care. And there are already untold studies of the value of nature in our lives, alleviating anxiety and depression. So starting in October 2018, I traveled across the United States, Canada, and into the Netherlands to meet with leaders of individual nursing homes, retirement homes, and the Enriched Day program in San Diego. Just outside of Atlanta, Andy Isaacson of Isaacson Living spoke about his mother's struggle to find a home that could meet her changing needs years earlier. After she passed away, he aspired to create a home that offered quality options for people as they aged. The point of my book, to operators, governments, and families, is this isn't magical thinking. It's already happening. And while these ideas have a shared DNA, mostly focused on kindness, what is unique and very interesting is the way each home does it differently. And what is telling is the need to stay on it with focus. Leaders I met are constantly working to uphold their philosophies so the home doesn't slip back into old ways. And it takes work. Some, like Carol Wood's retirement community in North Carolina, a beautiful North Carolina forest, I might add, are focused on the inclusion of people with dementia into daily life, providing freedom of movement to those who might otherwise be left inside for the remainder of their days. The CEO of Carol Woods told me the story of a resident, a man who was once in the CIA. He had dementia, and as we know, people with cognitive decline sometimes relive very vivid periods of their life, as if those moments are happening in real time. Every morning, he got up early and went for a walk through the forest, and in his mind, the CEO said, he was patrolling a dangerous area. Carol Woods has a big volunteer community among its residents, so several people always walked nearby, giving him space. making sure he didn't get lost. I was told that he marched through the forest for at least an hour every morning, and when he finished, he'd stop at the CEO's office to report back on his findings, telling her about snipers, and determining she was now safe to leave her office. When retelling this story, the CEO made a powerful point. Can you imagine what he would have been like if he was inside a locked unit? In a traditional home, he would have spent his days sitting in a chair, possibly staring at the floor. He would have been bored, frustrated, and quite possibly full of anxiety or anger, just like so many others who can't meet their individual interests during the day. I think it is fair to say that any of us would feel that way. In Canada, the Sherbrooke Community Centre uses a philosophy called the Eden Alternative. And it was the first, or among the first, to build small households, providing inspiration for the widely known US-based Greenhouse Project. These small homes also focused on the unique culture of their community, with a home for Indigenous people, veterans, or those of Ukrainian descent in Saskatoon, where Sherbrooke is located. And what's so interesting about this program is it's focused on reaching your potential at any age in life. And while I was there, I met a woman who needed to strengthen her leg after a stroke. Alice Cowell was her name. She spent most of her life on a 700-acre farm in the middle of the prairies and wasn't much for water sports. But at the age of 91, she bought her first bathing suit and began swimming lessons. I was petrified, she told me, but I just love it now. The CEO of Sherbrooke Community Centre now has plans to build a community for seniors and people of all ages on the same nursing home property. Seniors will literally age in place, she said, and other operators are starting to do something similar, planning for a mix of generations through libraries, cafes, classrooms, restaurants, and housing for people of all ages. It is a new approach. Many now believe we should stop separating people with dementia, leaving them unable to interact with others of different abilities or see the natural world unfolding around them. For now, we are in a time of reckoning. I hope the stories in my book will expose the fact that good care, good late life experiences are already established in progressive homes. In its own way, growing old can be a pleasure instead of a punishment. Thank you.
Moira, thank you so very much. I love that, we definitely agree to do it in this format, because I think what this does for everyone is provide a great, kind of insight and kind of, I call it a spotlight into what you're actually putting in each of these models. And just to give everyone an idea, we're not going to give too many spoiler alerts away. We're going to be able to, let you go in and be able to really delve into how each of these models are truly great homes with awesome communities that are standing behind them. So I wanted to kind of start off with kind of a question, and we'll kind of work through. We have obviously a lot of individuals that are on this call that, may be just starting to deal with, a parent, a relative, perhaps even a neighbor that they know, it's, here in Gwinnett, or whether it's a parent that, or a relative that is living a longer distance away. Do you have any thoughts based on when you looked at these models? Because I think the one key that we always see, and that we hear also at Gwinnett Senior Services and Health and Human Services, is there's just so much overwhelming information out there. How do you even begin, and how do you find these perfect situations that, based on these models, to be able to work with your parent? Or is it possible, even if that model may not be available, are there ways that they can almost incorporate and start to work with that person that is living with dementia or another cognitive decline?
That's an excellent question. I think it's the existential question of our times, because so many of us are dealing with this. And I know certainly from my personal experience, I wish that I and my parents had started looking at those questions a lot earlier than we did, because it will make a significant difference in your life. It doesn't have, it's not possible to find a home. Every home does not have the butterfly model or the Eden alternative, but it certainly helps to explore where those models are available. And they all have, for example, the Atlanta home, Park Springs and Pebblebrook would certainly help people who are out of the area align with the Butterfly program to find out where there are other homes. I don't think there are many in the United States. I think that is the first one, and I'm not sure if it has moved beyond that.
Correct.
There are several hundred greenhouse homes. And I will also say, as a matter of fact, greenhouse studies have shown that the smaller households, and they use greenhouse as an example, fared very well during COVID, simply because small households, more dedicated workers, less ease of spread of the infection. But greenhouse is in the United States, so is the Eden Alternative. And there are other models that look at relationship-based care. So I think if you can create a checklist of questions and interview the homes and ask them about their approach to care, are they task focused? Are they more interested in actual individual stories of the residents and helping them participate in life? So that if you're looking for nursing homes, those would be my suggestions. In the community, there are, Gwinnett Senior Services has many options available and does excellent work in the area. I would also look for day programs, because
Yes.
that would have made a huge difference for my father, for example. And I think a lot of families would benefit from those type of programs, the enriched day programs.
I was going to say that's a very excellent point. And Laura asked us a very good question about how you can find a good place. And I think I think we both could maybe agree to just let people know to not be discouraged when you first start that search. It's not like finding the pot of gold. It's a concentrated search, and the checklist is an excellent idea. And I've got actually a question here in the chat that is a really good one. Shira, I hope I'm saying your name correctly, ma'am. But she writes that I am 64 in good health. I am single. How do I make arrangements for myself now, so if I need help in the future, I don't burden my kids? And I just want to add to that, because we do have a lot of our boomer generation that is now coming, and that is something that is very much in the dialogue right now of how can we not be a burden on our children?
A great question. And I think that it's really helpful to discuss it with your children, actually, so they know what your plans and wishes are. I think we all also have to recognize what can we afford in terms of care. And so one of my personal goals is to try to remain as healthy as possible, but things can happen. Unexpected events, medical events can happen. And so I would, personally, I would start looking for programs that offer really good care. So in the back of your mind that there's something, an Eden Alternative home, for example, or a greenhouse home an hour away from your current residence. So you can look at that. You can put your name in somewhere and get information. Same with day programs, because some of the better homes have waiting lists, or programs have waiting lists.
True.
So just to be careful, I might sort of go out and talk to people about that. But I would really research and look at the programs that you think would most benefit you. And hopefully you don't need a nursing home, but a retirement home could be a really good option. And I would, the key piece of that is maintaining your social connection to others, especially if you live alone. Human beings need social connections, and we've all understand this because of the pandemic now and our isolation. So I would also highlight the fact that you can move to, for example, a NORC, a naturally occurring retirement community. You can have your private room, your private space, but also interact with other people, and it's built in. And that's such an important part of aging.
I love that. And I'm actually putting the NORC that you just mentioned, the naturally occurring retirement community, into the chat here, just so everyone can write that term down, because that is a very excellent term to keep in your notes if you are taking notes tonight. If you're like me, I'm a note taker, so you definitely want to take some notes this evening. I think you'll get some good advice. So so Moira, you and I, we talked about earlier that for instance, Gwinnett County, we have unique, but it's not unique as far as a global standard of, we have a lot of multi-generational households. And when you look at some of these programs that you spoke about with the models, there are many elements that kind of feed into that piece of that village concept of us taking care of one another, grandparents being caregivers as well as, the grandchildren being caregivers for the grandparents. So I mean, it's kind of a circuitous, I can't even speak tonight, sorry, let's just call it a roundabout of how we take care of care. So with that said, if someone is looking for, like you said, the day program or that home, is there a way that if someone is aging in place, that they could also look at some of the concepts that are within the book and maybe, develop some of the lifestyle if they're having to age at home with a parent, before they have to make some of those next step decisions, if the parent would have to leave the home?
Yes, absolutely. And it is it's going to take I think a bit of work to, but depending on the community supports that you have around you. So again, Gwyneth obviously is helping a lot of people. I spoke to someone who was involved in it's more of an idea or a philosophy called Momentia in Seattle. And that offered a lot of support to help people, especially with cognitive decline, remain within the community. So again, there are different organizations with different names that can do this. But one of the goals is to have opportunities to take your mother, father, loved one out for coffee meetings with other people, go to art exhibits, go for walks. There are group walks. I've been involved in them in the city of Toronto, where the Alzheimer's Society of Toronto has these regular meetings. And that provides support. And through that support, you're always connected to people who
Yes.
also connected to other ways to help you if there's an emergency. So you build out naturally a support system through your connection to these different organizations. And I would highly recommend.
Yes.
And again, I'm just going to go back to the enriched day programs, because some of them
Yes.
are not great. You can be sitting there, staring at the floor again for 8 hours a day. But the good ones can make a world of difference. And especially the one that I wrote about in San Diego used the caregivers called senior helpers. And I'm not trying to promote them, but I will say they specifically use Teepa Snow's, some of her training around connecting with people with cognitive decline. So there's just a greater, deeper, richer understanding of an individual's needs and how to connect with them in an emotional way as needed. So all of these, I guess my main point is build out your supports.
Exactly. And that caregiver support is such a critical piece. I will do a little commercial and just say that, if someone needs to connect with a caregiver support group, we can certainly help you do that, through Gwinnett Health and Human Services. And I know Denise will help provide some information as well. So if you are becoming, even after this talk tonight, and you say, I just really still need a good support of someone who is like-minded in dealing with some of the same conflicts or challenges that I am, or just to be able to celebrate the accomplishments that you're able to do as a caregiver, we can be able to help connect you with some local groups as well. So I'll just put that out there. So I was saying, let's not go away yet from I was going to say the Bittinger story and the Glenner model that you talked about. So first, let's focus back on the passage that you spoke with about Marjorie and her husband. So obviously, as you noted, they were together for 64 years, and it was a different approach of Marjorie actually coming and moving in with with her husband, and then having that process of letting go. And I think we can all agree that that is one of the hardest parts, is making that decision of what is that letting go point. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because, obviously, based on the research and feedback from those that are caregivers or industry, there are some best practices out there, or there's just even some very simple general actions, to be able to emotionally and physically let go with that dementia or cognitive decline, that where you realize you have to, uh, you know, place your loved one in a different set of care. So can you talk to us a little bit more about that and what you found within the research with that model, but just how that compared with, others that you spoke with?
I think the transitions are some of the most difficult, and that's something that we've all had to or will have to manage within our lives. So you need a lot of support around you. And I think it's really important to do the most research you can to find the best option for your parent or spouse or loved one so that you feel good about yourself. Because I know I spoke with people who said, if you feel guilty moving forward, that's going to last for a long time. But if you feel like you did your best, and it doesn't have to be perfect because nothing is perfect, But if you did your best, then there's a peace within you. And I can't tell you how many caregivers have expressed that to me, either the guilt or the feeling that, okay, I did well by my mom. And so there's that piece of it. The home, I mean, the butterfly home is quite unique. They're very innovative, and they really believe in freedom. So that was a pretty special experience for Marjorie. But she sort of exemplifies what a lot of us go through. And so I think from her perspective, she really needed to see it firsthand. And you can do that. And my understanding from a number of different programs where I'm from in Ontario, they have transition programs to help you move into the home, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Very slow. So you'll just go and visit, and you'll take part in the days, you go for lunch or dinner. And so it becomes a more natural experience instead of taking someone and leaving them in a strange situation, which is absolutely terrifying, depending on your vulnerability.
Correct.
Ease them into this new world with new people. And they're finding that that is a really great solution for a more peaceful transition.
I love that. I love that. One thing that I was going to say that I loved when you talked about the Glenner Town Square model, and with Susie and her identity to be able to come back and actually, be very, walking into the social situation for the first time and being very closed, sticking with her caregiver, but how they were able to explore and figure out that, it took relating to what she could relate to. Um, you know, so I'm gonna take that piece, and I'm going to find another piece in your book where Dr. Alan Power actually discussed about and defined dementia is not a non-specific syndrome. It is not by who the person is, because there's over 100 forms of dementia out there and not one method or approach. So like that approach with Susie in the accounting, it may have worked in that case, and there are some that may say that may work, other approaches may work. So what does that look like as we look at all these different forms? I mean, again, very overwhelming, but can you talk a little bit about how maybe you looked at that approach of dementia is just not one form, it's many forms in its approach, and how we do that and deal.
And that was such an interesting point, because he was talking about why are we locking people away in specific units when
Right.
the majority of people in long-term care do have some type of cognitive decline. And there are so many different types. And in fact, we all relate to cognitive decline in a different way. It impacts us all differently for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm.
The programs that I wrote about and philosophies would simply look at each individual based on their needs. And so you're trying to have, you want to have a dedicated caregiver who gets to know me, who understands my life history, and can connect with me in a different way, depending on the time as well and what my needs are. So I might be reliving something very traumatic in my past, but my caregiver can connect with me with empathy in that moment. And in another example, and I'll give a quick example of some studies up here that are using virtual reality,
Yes.
people with severe dementia. Do is, and this is not a day-long thing, but for maybe half an hour, they'll play a 3D around their room. You'll have a 3D projection of something that they connected with in their earlier life. So for example, they had a truck driver who was like quite upset. He wanted to be out driving again. And so they actually filmed a truck driver, a long haul truck driver going down a highway in the States. And they played it for this man, and it calmed him because it was a familiar place to him. And when I was in De Hogevik in the Netherlands, they spoke about that. The familiarity was so important. So you want to give people a normal existence that they can relate to.
Yes.
And those are just some examples of ways to sort of manage the individual based on their needs at a moment in time.
I love that. I love that. That it is so true about just, how you treat the individual. It's not, dementia is not just one label. It is obviously who the person is. So I was going to say, speaking of who the person is and that personal experience, you were able to actually in each of your chapters be able to weave a very personal element where you spoke about your own experience with your parents and some of their examples of decline. And I want to talk about, because in one of those chapters, you actually spoke with Laura Tamblyn Watts again, and she identified that she kind of related it to as you're trying to find a key into the lock and have that understanding. What does that mean to you? With finding that key in the lock and working through that, because obviously that personal experience added such a greater depth to these chapters in exploring the models. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
For me, my experience was my parents left it too long. They lived too long on their own. My mom was 91 when they moved into a retirement home, mostly because I think she spent a lot of time taking care of my father. So, and for them, they needed something more. And I think my dad actually benefited from the retirement home more than my mom did. And so for him, there were lots of sports going on in the home, big screen TVs. And my dad was a real athlete in his time. So he really connected with that. And my mom, less so, I find. I'm sort of sad to say that, actually. She needed discussions with people about politics and so on. So I think she had her book club ladies come and visit her in their little retirement home room. So we kept trying to find ways to make it work for them. And so personally, that was my experience. My mom didn't survive too long after they moved in, unfortunately. But my dad would have benefited again from one of those day programs that provided arts and music. He loved to paint. And so I had plans to take him to Toronto to bring him to a really special program. I was always trying to see what matched their personal needs.
Right. Exactly. And it was to be applauded, because you did actually open your heart quite a bit in there of being able to talk about that experience, but talking about it on how it related with others that were dealing with some similar situations. So that was an incredible tie that you did with the book itself. Another question I'm going to ask is, what is a commonality or thread that you kind of saw that existed in each of the models? Is there anything that you kind of saw that ran throughout that became more of a common theme?
Kindness, ultimately kindness. It's so easy to offer kindness to people, really, but when the home is focused on tasks and the institutional medicalized model, the kindness is secondary, and it could be foremost. And the medical model could operate quite beautifully behind the scenes, but not be the star of the show. But kindness and interest in the individual. And there's another piece of this that is so important, I think, especially now with a shortage of long-term care frontline workers. And we've seen this before the pandemic arrived, and certainly now we've got a bigger problem. But kindness for the workers as well. And that was the prevailing theme everyone spoke to me about, was saying the workers, if the workers are not happy, the residents are not happy. And so the good homes, the progressive homes, really tried hard to create to give the workers a sense of purpose as well, just like they did for the residents, to give them autonomy in their care and
Yes.
for them to make decisions around the emotional care of their residents. And there was a really great example. Do I have time to tell this?
You certainly do. We are still good on time. So yes, please keep going. As long as everyone else is good, and I know they are, I'm going to speak for them.
In the Atlanta home, the Butterfly home in Stone Mountain, they spoke about Butterfly gives workers the freedom to make choices for their residents based on the residents' individual needs. And so there was one woman, Miss Priscilla was her name, and she would not go to sleep at night. She would, put on her nightgown and get in bed, but she would always reappear in the hallway. And so her worker finally decided that I have an idea. So she brought in her own pajamas to wear at night. And she put Miss Priscilla to bed and then got in bed with her. And Miss Priscilla fell asleep. And this seems unusual, but her family was fine with it ultimately. Mm-hmm. I think it really came down to the fact that most of us spend part, at least, of our adult lives with somebody else, sleeping with somebody else. And so I think Miss Priscilla just needed that sort of warmth beside her. Mm-hmm. And her caregiver understood that. And so there's a funny little story that I tell in the book where one night the other staff were looking for the caregiver and they found her and Miss Priscilla both in their pajamas, sound asleep in bed.
Right.
They were supposed to be on shift, but they just laughed about it because
Right.
that was part of their program, the Freedom to Innovate. So
I was going to say, and that's something that I don't think we always think about all the time, is that those that are working as caregivers in the industry and helping support relatives who are helping the care with that loved one. Sometimes there becomes some inexplicable, just exchange and familiarity that goes on, like that caregiver with Miss Priscilla. So that is a great point to definitely to push out there as well. I did want to, I'm just looking to see, I love this. I'm actually going to read this to you. I want you to know that we have someone saying that she is amazing. Love the importance of family style meals with the caregiver that you mentioned, that she mentions. I was going to say, could you talk a little bit about that? Because I know several of the models in the book did have that, kind of the meal as that central point, and how they actually did it in so many different ways. Did you find that that was kind of a commonality, or was that something that, you saw was different?
no, that's a good question. Meals are one of the most important parts of the day for most of us, and certainly when you are living in long-term care. Now, in traditional homes, it's probably all you have to look forward to, but in these homes, it's a natural part of the day. And in many of them, I found sort of a constant theme, which is part of residents, because many of them are living in smaller households, they help with the preparation of the food, which is supposed to help build up an appetite, or just you can smell the aroma of the food cooking, and that's if it's good food, that's a really lovely. So that helps people. Older people need to eat. That weight loss is not necessarily good for them, and so they get more energy by this experience. But
Mhm.
in the Netherlands, they would sit around in their little living room, and they might help the caregiver cook, or they'd have a glass of wine while they were waiting for their meals, or a beer. And what they said there was, we're not going to tell you that you cannot enjoy yourself. If you want to have um, uh, ice cream for dinner, then go ahead.
Ice cream.
So,
I love that. Embrace your life, and what you choose and how you choose.
yeah.
I was going to say, I think the approach that we see as a theme is, obviously, as you said, it's the kindness and celebrating how we can all approach this as not something to be, scared of in a distance, but be able to embrace full in front of us. Obviously, this is a very, a good way to transition. And I will actually just make sure, because I think we've got time for one more question. And this is a very important one, because I think so many of us really benefited from this book. So I think a lot of us would like to know, do you have a next project, or even another, story that you're working on currently, with, because we all know you have this amazing day job too. So, how does that all fit in, and what is next for Moira Welsh?
Oh, thank you for asking. That's so nice of you. I'm actually working on a podcast with my newspaper, the Toronto Star, and it's going to be inspired by my book. And so we're going to look at living well. And it was really interesting. I just attended an event by it's called Baycrest Hospital and a Center for Aging, Brain Health and Innovation. Super interesting event that they had, all about technology and new ideas. So I'm going to try to pull some of that in. So you can, and it's going to be a combination perhaps of tech options for a better, even a better death, palliative care.
Okay.
That is, we have the right to have a good death, and not a lonely death,
Right.
a good one. But also just the simple human connection. We need more friendship. We need more social connection in our
Yes.
lives, and how we can do that. So it's not formulated fully yet. You're getting very raw idea out of me, but it'll be,
Yeah.
I do plan to do another book as well on living well also, because there's so much that can be accomplished, and we have so much to look forward to.
Exactly. Well, I love that. And, and just again, to compliment, if everyone has not had a chance to read the book, please definitely do it. We've obviously gotten some very key, just, so I say calling it the sampling of the chef's treats of what this book really is. And I think you really will very much enjoy it. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes,
Thank you so much for having me.
absolutely. And please remember us when the next book comes out. We would love to host you again. Regina, thank you so much for, you did a superb job. You were the perfect moderator.
Thank you.
And absolutely, and thank you so much to our wonderful author of Happily Ever
Thank you.
Revolutionary Approaches to Old Age. Please get a copy of this, or excuse me, to long-term care. And we look forward to her next book. Hope you have a lovely evening, everyone. Thank you again for being a part of this program this evening.
Thank you. Thank you, Myra.
Thank you.